perfume David had insisted she wear. The room was perfectly preserved, a shrine to a life that had been halted in its tracks. She stepped inside and realized she had walked into the heart of David's obsession. Nia moved deeper into the room, her eyes adjusting to the dim light filtering through heavy curtains. Every object was a relic. A silver brush lay beside a crystal bottle, the liquid inside long since evaporated. She approached the vanity, the surface covered in a fine layer of dust that she hesitated to disturb. Tucked into the corner of the mirror frame was a photograph. She reached out, her fingers trembling as she pulled the image free. The face staring back at her was not a stranger. It was a mirror. The eyes, the tilt of the jaw, the curve of the brow. It was her own face, captured in a moment of laughter she had never experienced. The shock hit her like a physical blow, forcing her to lean against the vanity to stay upright. She stared at the image, searching for a flaw, a difference, anything to break the impossible symmetry. Then her gaze drifted to the background of the shot. Through a window reflected in the glass, a man stood in the shadows. Nia recognized the jagged scar. The air in the room seemed to thin. Nia's thumb brushed the surface of the photo, tracing the jagged line of the scar she knew all too well. It was Marek, the same man who had terrorized the alleyways of District 4, the same man whose presence had forced her to run in the first place. The silence of the room suddenly felt heavy, suffocating. How could he be here, reflected in the window of a life she had only just entered? She looked from the photo to the room, then back again. This was not a coincidence. The two worlds she had fought to keep separate, the poverty of the streets and the sterile wealth of the mansion, were collapsing into a single, terrifying point. She realized then that her selection for this role had never been about her resemblance to a missing woman. It was a trap. Marek was the predator, and she had been placed directly in his line of sight. Her pulse quickened, the sound of her own blood rushing in her ears. She was not a wife. She was a lure, placed in a glass house to draw a ghost out of the shadows, her grip tightening on the frame until her knuckles turned white. A floorboard groaned behind her. Nia spun, the photograph clutched to her chest. David stood in the doorway, his frame blocking the exit. He did not look surprised to find her there. He looked disappointed. He stepped into the room, his gaze locking onto the image in her hands. "I told you not to dig," he rasped. Nia held the photo out, her hand shaking. "She did not disappear, did she? You are using me as bait." David did not flinch. He walked toward her, stopping only when the distance between them was uncomfortable. "Marek took the only thing I ever loved," he said. "He did not just steal her, he erased her." He gestured to the room, then to Nia. "You are the bait. You are the only version of her I have left to draw him out." Nia felt the walls closing in. She was not a person to him. She was a weapon, sharpened and placed in the path of a killer. The day of the Founders' Gala arrived with a suffocating stillness. Nia stood in the center of the room while staff moved around her, their faces blank, their movements precise. Every detail had been calibrated to ensure she was indistinguishable from the woman she was replacing. She watched them through the mirror, but she did not see herself. She saw a target. David entered, his presence drawing the air from the room. He did not speak, but his eyes scanned her, checking for any sign of hesitation. he walked to the window, looking out over the city, and placed a hand on the glass. "Tonight, the hunt ends," he said, his voice low and steady. Nia felt the weight of the silence that followed. She walked to the foyer, where the security team waited by the doors. They moved with a synchronized efficiency that made her skin crawl. She realized then that she was not just being escorted, she was being guarded, kept in place until the moment the trap was sprung. As the car pulled away from the mansion, the city lights blurred into streaks of cold neon. The gala was not an event. It was the killing floor. The ballroom doors opened to a wall of sound and light. Nia stepped across the threshold, her movements measured and deliberate. The room was packed with people who moved with the fluid, calculated grace of predators. She felt their gazes tracking her progress, 100 eyes measuring the distance between her and the center of the floor. She kept her chin high, her breathing steady, forcing her muscles to remain loose despite the urge to bolt. Every laugh that echoed off the high ceilings sounded like a warning. She moved through the throng, accepting a glass from a passing server without breaking her stride. Her eyes darted across the room, ignoring the faces that turned toward her, searching for the one presence that did not belong. She scanned the perimeter, checking the shadows near the pillars and the movement of the security detail stationed at every exit. She was a ghost walking through a furnace, performing a role that demanded absolute stillness while her heart hammered against her ribs. She paused near a marble column, her hand resting on the cool stone to steady herself. The music swelled, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Nia turned, her movements fluid as she navigated the space between the dancers. She felt the pressure of the crowd, a shifting mass of bodies that obscured her view of the perimeter. She scanned the upper tier, her eyes darting between the gilded rafters and the shadowed alcoves. A man stood near the edge of the balcony, his silhouette stark against the velvet curtains. She paused, her breath catching as she focused on the figure. He was motionless, a dark anchor in the sea of light. As she watched, he shifted, his gaze locking onto hers with a precision that cut through the noise of the room. He did not smile. He did not move toward her. Instead, he raised a hand, his fingers tracing a slow, deliberate line across his throat. The gesture was a silent, jagged promise. Nia felt the blood drain from her face, but she forced her expression to remain neutral. She turned her head, looking back toward the center of the room, but the image of that motion burned in her mind. The trap was no longer a theory. It was a physical reality closing in. She felt the air in the room grow heavy, the space between her and the balcony shrinking with every beat of her heart. The hunt had begun. Nia leaned in, her lips brushing against his ear. "He is here," she whispered, the words barely audible over the music. David did not flinch. His hand clamped onto her waist, his fingers digging into her side with a force that left no room for hesitation. He turned her toward the exit, his movements sharp and unyielding. They pushed through the crowd, the sea of people parting. As David navigated the floor with a singular, aggressive purpose, Nia stumbled once, her feet catching on the polished floor, but his grip tightened, pulling her upright and forcing her to keep pace. The air grew colder as they neared the heavy doors, the noise of the party fading into a muffled roar behind them. They crossed the threshold into the quiet, sterile hallway. the sudden drop in volume amplifying the sound of their synchronized footsteps. David did not speak. He led her toward the service entrance. He shoved the door open and pushed her inside, the interior of the car smelling of cold leather. He slid in beside her, the door slamming shut. The engine idled, a low hum that vibrated through the floor of the vehicle. David stared straight ahead, his hands white-knuckled against the steering wheel. Nia sat motionless, the silence stretching until it felt like a physical weight. Then her phone buzzed against her palm. She looked down. A notification blinked on the screen, an anonymous video file. Her thumb hovered, then pressed play. The screen illuminated the dark interior with a harsh, flickering light. On the display, a woman sat in a sterile, white-walled room. It was Katherine. She was not a victim. She was not missing. She was calmly checking the magazine of a handgun, her movements precise and practiced. "He has found a replacement." Katherine's voice drifted from the speaker. "Good. Let the doll distract him while we empty the offshore accounts." Nia felt the blood turn to ice in her veins. She looked at the screen, then at David. He was still staring into the darkness, unaware that his entire reality had just been dismantled. The video continued, showing Katherine laughing, a sound that mirrored Nia's own voice with terrifying accuracy. The deception was complete. The car felt smaller, the air thinner, as the truth settled between them. The hum of the engine died as the world exploded inward. A sharp, rhythmic crack echoed through the cabin, followed by the sound of tempered glass disintegrating into 1,000 jagged diamonds. Nia shielded her face as the window vanished, replaced by a rush of freezing salt-heavy air. Before she could process the movement, a hand reached through the frame. Fingers clamped onto her shoulder with bruising force, hauling her sideways toward the jagged opening. She clawed at the seat, her nails scraping against the upholstery, but the momentum was unstoppable. She was yanked out of the car, her feet skidding across the wet, uneven wood of the pier. The impact with the ground knocked the breath from her lungs. She scrambled to regain her balance, her palms stinging from the grit and moisture of the boards. She looked up, gasping for air, and saw her own face staring back. The real Katherine Vance stood in the center of the pier, a suppressed pistol leveled at Nia's temple. The wind whipped between them. David stumbled out of the wreckage, his movements erratic. He stopped dead, his eyes locked on the woman holding the weapon. The silence of the pier was absolute, save for the rhythmic slap of dark water against the pilings. He took a step forward, his voice cracking as he whispered a name he had not spoken in years. Katherine did not flinch. She kept the barrel steady, her finger resting lightly against the trigger. David looked from the gun to the woman behind it, then back to Nia, who remained motionless on the wet wood. The truth hit him with the force of a physical blow. He had spent months hunting a phantom, pouring his resources into a search for a victim who had never been taken. The kidnapping was a fabrication, a calculated exit strategy designed to leave him behind. David's shoulders slumped. The power dynamic that had defined his life had evaporated, leaving him exposed in the freezing rain. Katherine shifted her stance. The cold metal of the pistol barrel pressed firmly against Nia's temple, a steady, unyielding weight. She could feel the vibration of the ocean's spray hitting the pier, but her focus remained locked on the woman holding the weapon. Catherine's fingers